Welcome to the Demeere podcast. We talk about martial arts, self-defense, and a whole lot more. And now your host, Demeere.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 45 of the podcast, in which I interview Andy Benfield. Now, as always, before we get started, quick shout out to one of my patrons, and this one goes out to Robert. Robert just joined a few weeks ago, actually, and I want to make sure to also give shout outs to patrons who haven't been with me as long as others, just, to not discriminate, so to speak. Anyway, thank you, Robert, for joining, for supporting the podcast, for helping me do what I do. And obviously, everybody else, if you want to support the show, then go to patreon.com/Wim Demeere, my name, links in the show notes. And then you can support the show and get access to a truckload of content, because our library of videos is actually quite big. The newsletter, everything else, a bunch of stuff. Check it out. Now, before we get started, the show notes for this episode you can find at wimsblog.com/45, the number 45. And I will post everything we discuss here. This is actually an episode I wanted to do for a long time, because I've known Andy for years. He's one of my students, and he's led an interesting life. Let's call it that way. He's been traveling throughout Africa and Asia for a long time, visited many countries and lived in several of those. So I always wanted to do a podcast with him talking about his experiences, and mostly have an opportunity to pick his mind basically on all the things you can do to keep yourself safe. So if you are interested in that, and if you plan on traveling, or you know somebody who plans on traveling to those regions, well, give this one a listen to, and share this episode with the people that might be interested in doing that. Also, there's a bonus episode on Patreon in which Andy takes questions from my patrons and also gives a bunch more of really very practical advice. And that's what we focused on in this episode, just the practicalities and how to avoid danger, how to spot danger, and so on. That's it as far as the intro goes. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. Feel free to obviously share, subscribe, like, wherever you listen to this. That helps out tremendously. Okay, enjoy. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. And today I've got a really interesting guest for you. It's somebody that I've known for a long time. He's one of my students also for a long time. And the reason why I wanted to have him on is that he's the person who's done the most crazy travels that I know of personally. So welcome, Andy. How are you doing?
Thanks very much.
What an intro,
that
right?
Introduction. And yeah, and I'm still here. And good evening. I'm actually in Asia at the moment, so other side of the world from you. But great to be able to link up. And also, I listen to your podcast avidly, so it's very weird to be on the other side of the speaker this time, I must say.
Well, it's just us two talking. Nobody's listening, so don't worry too much about it.
All right.
Yeah. So quickly, Andy Benfield, you've been traveling a whole lot. Could you talk a little bit about how that came about, that you've been traveling throughout specifically Asia and Africa for so many years now?
Yeah, I think in my childhood, my parents were always telling me about adventures they'd had when they were in Australia just after they got married, and that sounded like a lot of fun. And then after I kind of finished school, I got a job in a bank in London, and as you're supposed to do, and suddenly realized that the whole kind of capitalist materialist thing wasn't quite for me. So I kind of quit that and went off to Israel to work on a farm for a bit. And then after I figured, I like this traveling bit, and I'd like to do it long term. So then I kind of focused on getting into a career that would involve that, which was kind of diplomacy, and then kind of advising Western embassies and people like the UN and the European Union in the different countries where they work, which turned out to be kind of mainly, let's say, developing countries in Asia, Africa, Latin America, Pacific, most places basically, but not kind of Europe and North America.
Okay, and can you, top of your head, do you know how many countries that you visited and lived in, or stayed at for a certain period of time? Just to give people an idea that, you didn't just stay like in one country for 10 years and then 15 years in another one, because I know you've traveled quite a bit, but if you could just list a few That would be great.
Yeah, it was. I mean, there was a period where it was kind of a couple of years in each country. So I was in India for a couple of years, then Ethiopia, then Namibia, Indonesia, Nepal. And then a lot of shorter trips as well when I had jobs which involved kind of going somewhere for a couple of weeks, kind of giving advice and then coming back. And then increasingly in recent years, kind of personal trips. Which have been, maybe a few weeks or a few months somewhere. But basically, yeah, for the last, I guess, 20 years now, I've been, living and working full time in developing countries. So the exact number, I'm not sure. I would say it's definitely more than half of the total. But I think I gave up counting after about 60 or something. Some 60. Years back. So,
60 countries.
That's some homework for me. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's definitely more than that. Yeah.
Well, that's good. I mean, and that's what I wanted to the listeners to make it clear to them is that, I mean, I know, because we've known each other for such a long time that you've traveled quite a bit because, you sent me the emails from there, or we have a Skype call from there or so on.
Or distress calls saying, Wim, how do I get out of this situation?
Well, it's every time you called when that happened, I mean, it was already over. You managed to get out of it. So
that's true. I was just traumatized, yes.
For the podcast now, for the interview, what I'd like to do most, and we talked about this a little bit beforehand, is just get a lot of practical stuff, because people have these either very romantic ideas about traveling throughout Africa and Asia, like it's beautiful and the nature and blah blah blah. And then the other side of the equation is that people think like, oh no, it's all war-torn countries and child soldiers and danger lurking everywhere. So obviously, as you've been doing this for 20 years, I mean, there is a way to navigate that, and that's what I'd like to focus on. So what are some of the basic practical security measures that you would advise taking?
Okay. Yeah, that's a good question. I think the first kind of macro one is kind of knowledge is power. Like, know where you're going, find out as much as possible. I mean, that applies to anywhere, but if you're talking about the dodgier places, then you might get your embassy's official advice. So if you're an American, you'll maybe speak to the American embassy or look at their website for the country you want to go to and see what they say. But that's often quite conservative. Same with news stories; they're often quite overblown. Often, a lot of people have opinions, but you find out they've not even been there. So with the dodgier countries, I think it's go step by step. There's few countries that I would completely rule out going to, but there's a lot of parts of those countries that I would rule out. So it's kind of getting there often, getting on the ground and really getting that local knowledge, and really as local as possible on the ground. You get out of the capital, okay, this area may be restricted, it may be dangerous, but it's only once you really get out there that you know what might be possible. And a couple of weeks ago, I shouldn't say the country, but it was in South Asia, and I was told I absolutely not drive up this road through the jungle. It was absolutely out of bounds. And I was with a buddy, and we thought, well, it looks beautiful and amazing. Let's try. Surely we'll get turned back, but we'll ask people along the way and see if there's any military activity, because there was rumors there was some fighting. It turned out actually absolutely fine. Yeah. And it was a great experience, but we were very carefully kind of asking as we went along. And I think that there's another good point actually, that local knowledge is really important, because there's some stuff that's safe at home in Europe or North America or wherever you live that may not be safe in that country, and stuff you might not normally even think about, like taking a taxi. There used to be a great scam in Johannesburg airport where you'd get in the taxi and they kind of open the trunk to put the luggage in, and you'd be, by that time in the back of the taxi looking forward. They wouldn't put it in, or they put it in and take it out. You'd be driven off to a hotel, and and there would be no luggage, and the driver would play innocent. Or things like even walking down the street in the middle of the day. I mean, I was in Guatemala City, and Guatemala, beautiful country, but a lot of crime issues. And I went to the wrong government office for a meeting, and I said to them, "Oh, where's the correct one?" They pointed literally 50 meters down the road, and And I'm in the central business district where the government buildings are. And I thought, well, thank you very much. I'll just walk down there. And, they looked at me in shock and said, absolutely not. And I had to be given like an armed escort 50 meters down the street, on a Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock. So yeah, knowing those kind of things that are going to be a bit different in a specific country than they are back home. It could also be the other way round, that, back home, the army and the police are your friend. Yeah. That may not be the case overseas. And I remember once being in Kashmir, and I'm not actually saying that in this instance from they're going to try and rip you off or whatever, which of course can happen, but a very well-meaning soldier. I was in Indian-administered Kashmir, which is a disputed area, and there's militant activity, and at that time a fair amount of attacks and explosions and stuff. And so I was one of the few foreigners who were up there, and I was walking through the market, and this Indian soldier, heavily armed, came up, and he was just walking next to me and saying, like, "I'm here for your protection." But that made me much more of a target, because there's a lot of people wanting to kind of, blow up people like him. So it's kind of, understanding that context to say, "Thank you very much, sir, but I won't be needing your assistance today." And I think having, this myth that you somehow do these things alone. I mean, I don't usually, and I think most people you see on TV and stuff don't. You have local guides and fixes. A lot of places would just be impossible to go without. I mean, yes, there are instances that you don't, but if you're up in the mountains somewhere in the Himalayas, you need someone to navigate who speaks the local language, and who can also be a buffer between you and the authorities, especially if you're asking for a special permission or something like that. And that have that deep local knowledge that, even if you do your research and try, you're not going to get to that kind of level. But then that's some more macro stuff, but some more just real those common sense tips. I mean, tell someone where you're going, so someone will come looking if you don't get there. But at the same time, don't tell the wrong people. You may not want soldiers or the police or people to know that you're traveling along a certain road at a certain time, knowing that you're a foreigner. You probably have money on you, or you could be a good kidnap target, whatever.
But
leave your social media posts for
I mean, So I mean, again, just for the listeners, could you go a little bit more into detail, because obviously it makes sense that somebody knows where you're going, so that they will indeed come looking if you don't show up again. But how do you determine, who are the wrong people to tell? So, is there any advice that you can give along that topic?
Yeah, I mean, one would be, obviously friends, family back home, so they know, and you're like, I'm going to call you from the hotel this evening or from wherever I to. Then there may be someone you befriend in the local area, maybe your accommodation that you stayed in, the night before, or local fix you used, or someone like that. The people not to tell is, the random stranger, or maybe the policeman that stopped you or whatever. I mean, there I tend to keep it just a little bit vague about where I'm going and when. And even say to them, if they are insisting to know, oh yes, and my embassy are fully aware I'm here, and I'm friends are waiting for me on the other side, or this kind of thing, to give that impression that you're not kind of alone and unsupported, even if you really are. And then, not telling the wrong people as well. I mean, just broadcasting your stuff out on social media, your location and this kind of stuff, leave that for a couple of days, and maybe be a bit vague about exactly where you're going next.
Yeah. Okay, makes sense. And you just mentioned something also that might be interesting to go into a little bit more detail. Is you mentioned the local fixer. So I'm sure a bunch of people are having their imagination is running wild as to what a local fixer is. So could you define that a little bit, and how do you get one? How do you work with one?
Yeah, I mean, it's someone, it can be. I mean, most people will be familiar with the idea of a tourist guide, right? If you go and visit the Colosseum in Rome, or the pyramids in Egypt, or whatever, that some guy will probably turn up, or lady will turn up and offer to take you around for a few bucks. But yeah, in more kind of out of the way places, finding someone who could organize transport, perhaps. Be your trekking guide, act as an interpreter, and if it's a trip where you're doing research or something like that, find the right people to talk to, arrange for permissions from the authorities, And that normally I would kind of ask around before I went, anyone I knew who'd been there, especially friends who are, say, aid workers or journalists or something. And normally, someone will say, oh, yeah, I got a good guy or a good lady in this place, like, give them a call. I mean, good reputations kind of spread quite fast. Or in your accommodation, asking there, do they know someone? And yeah, so it's that buffer again between you and the local authorities, that knowledge of local customs. And I mean, sometimes, especially when I've been like trekking up in the mountains in India and stuff, you end up almost with them being like a mother figure. Like, I mean, it's like, they tell you where to walk. They're the ones who can speak the local language. They make the camp. They cook the food at night. And, could end up becoming completely dependent on this person, which is kind of bizarre, but very handy. Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, thanks. I just wanted to go into a little bit more detail because it's like I said, I can imagine people hearing the word fixer and they're like, ooh, I want to fix your
right,
shoes.
yeah, it's where you get your drugs and your whatever from. No, it's nothing. I was not inferring anything like that.
Yeah. All right. So anything else you want to mention?
Well, yeah, I mean, from the practical side, I mean, that being prepared, right? I mean, and I know this just from the kind of bitter experience of thinking I'm just popping out for a little walk or a little drive or an average day, and I don't really need to take water or food or backup documents. And then suddenly something happens, the weather breaks, or you get a breakdown, or you get arrested, and you end up in a whole bunch of trouble. I remember walking out in Namibia in Southern Africa from the lodge I was staying in and thinking, I'm just going to take a half an hour walk up this kind of hill. And I think I'd been watching a bit too much Bear Grylls on the National Geographic or something, and I got that the hill turned into a mountain quite quickly, and I was kind of trying to go straight up the side rather than following the ridge, and I ended up just stupidly stuck. And I had like a tiny bottle of water with me, no food, no sunscreen. And to cut a long story short, like quite a lot of hours later, I'd had to kind of jump and slide and slither down a very steep rock face, and I turned up back at my fancy lodge looking extremely, bedraggled, and they were just like, what the hell happened to you? So I told them the story, and I'm kind of immortalized there now, actually, because the manager happened to be making the new cocktail menu that night, and he let me design a cocktail as I'd had such a rough day, and then he named it the Benfield Disaster. So if you ever go to the Hudea Desert Lodge in Namibia, you can drink one of them, and to my health.
That's actually quite good. The Benfield Disaster. I just made a new cocktail yesterday because I'm finished making my first batch of limoncello, and I quickly made one up, and I call it my favorite mistake. So I'm sure you can figure out the rest.
Yeah,
but the Benfield Disaster is so much better.
Okay. And then I was going to say, yeah, I mean, have insurance. Then it's kind of okay if you get robbed and you're not thinking, stupidly resist and get shot. Sadly, I know people that has happened to. There could be extremes. In Central America once, I was advised by a security advisor I had there for work. Don't bring your iPhone, right? Because they're probably going to steal your phone at one point at the traffic light. Okay, fine. I said, no problem. I'll get a cheap, like $20 cheapest phone I can find. He's like, no, don't get a super cheap phone, because if they rob you and you give them the super cheap phone, they won't believe that's your real phone, and they'll shoot you anyway if you don't give them something fancier. So you actually needed a mid-range phone that was worth at least a couple of $100, and then you could kind of give it away if robbed and not be killed. So yeah, there is some crazy stuff that happens.
That's pretty.
Sometimes, like that.
And we've talked about this before, and you and I get it, but it's one of those things that if you just go back 2 minutes to what you just said about if you have insurance, it's okay if you get robbed. the assumption is that, well, you will get robbed. And then there's like you said, it's a little bit more extreme, like, no, get the right kind of phone, because if you get the cheap one, they're gonna shoot you anyway. And if you take your own one, well, you're gonna lose it. So figuring out what the right level of loot that is that the robbers will need to get into, yes. that's pretty extreme when it comes to preparing yourself. Extreme in the sense that it takes some specific knowledge of the country and also a specific mindset that you understand, like, right, this is how things work. If I'm not at home. And I found that as time goes by, many people in Western countries do not understand this mindset that you have to do some mental gymnastics to basically wrap your head around certain realities of the country that you're visiting. Like, okay, no, you think, well, I just want to take my phone, take beautiful pictures. No, you will not leave with your phone. They'll take it from you. Well, but they have no right to. Sure, they have no right, but they'll shoot you. Yes, but no, there is no yes, but there is. Take the Guatemala phone, take the right one with you, and don't get shot over a stupid phone. I just wanted to highlight
and know be prepared. I mean, it's like they say, sometimes for investment strategies, right? This is a risky investment. When you go into this, be prepared that money is potentially lost, and if you're not happy with that, don't go into it. And it's sometimes a bit like that, like the wallet that you're taking out today. Be prepared if those cards get lost and that money goes, you're still okay. And I say that, and I'm such a damn hypocrite, because just 2 months ago, I was traveling through Nepal on the last overland expedition, which is some friends of mine driving an old 60-year-old Land Rover from Singapore to London. And we were then in a kind of tourist town in Nepal, so we were quite relaxed, and we went out for the evening, and I just grabbed my wallet, and I didn't do the normal, right, I'm just taking out, one card and a bit of cash. Everything was in it. We were in a taxi going to a bar. There was a torrential rainstorm. We all bundled out of the taxi fast. I had kind of a baggy pair of pants on. It slipped out the pocket. We dashed across the street, kind of to shelter from the rain. And only at that point, I suddenly realized, like, the wallet is gone. Chased after the cab, couldn't get it. Lost everything. I mean, luckily I was with friends there. They sorted me out, and I wasn't desperate. But it was like, that's a really amateurish and embarrassing mistake to make when you're going on podcasts about how many countries you've been to and how long you've been doing this stuff. So that really brought it back to me. Like, even if, because normally I have the stuff separated, but it's like, no, even if it's just a little walk out to the bar in the evening in a safe town that, with your mates, it still makes sense to follow those kind of protocols, because that was, hugely inconvenient.
Well, it's one of those things that is also, complacency kills, and it's you get used to living in these kind of countries, and you've got the experience and so on, and just like not even thinking, nah, it'll be fine. Just like you said, you're in a rush, and then it's raining, and then you don't pay attention for like half a minute, and also like, oh crap, I'm in trouble, or I lost my wallet, or and so on. I would be very interested in seeing the first world traveler who never made a mistake, even after many years of experience. So yeah, but then again, it's like you said, you were with friends, you know how to take care of yourself that way and handle it and so on. And I think that's one of the big kind of mental traps that people might get when they hear this. It's like, okay, well, even if you lose your wallet, you'll be fine. No, that's not what you just said. You said, I was with friends, I wasn't alone, and you found out how to manage it, as opposed to somebody who goes to one of these countries for the first time isn't paying attention to keeping his valuables on him and doing it the right way, like you explained. And then all of a sudden they're into trouble, and they think, well, I'll be fine. And then like, no, no. And I know of many stories of people who kind of had that experience, thinking like, nah, it's going to be okay. I know how to take care of myself. Yes, back home. But back home, things are different here.
Yeah, exactly. And one thing I wanted to bring in there, because that also reminded me of you and I are both fans of kind of technology and stuff. And there's just like two, three things that have, for me, really changed things in the last years and made things a lot safer. And one is Uber or Grab or Lyft, whatever, you might have in your country, these ride sharing services where basically you book it on an app. You can have your credit card already in there, so it's paid. You know who the driver is. The driver who knows who you are. It's all registered, and that takes just a huge risk out of using taxis. And these companies are actually now in a lot of developing countries. I mean, you'd really be surprised. I mean, in a lot of African capitals now, you can find this. Because in the past, you get a taxi. I mean, now was really that key choke point where there was a risk, especially getting into an airport late at night, somewhere in Africa, for example, taking a cab. You don't know if it's licensed or properly regulated. I've had two experiences myself where I've actually had to physically bail out of a taxi. One in Burma, when they were just driving off the wrong way, and I was saying to them, no, I wanted to go that way. They were just not listening, just driving off. So I can wait till they went around a corner, slow down a bit, and then had to jump out. And I had another really bizarre one in Sudan, in East Africa back in the day, when the driver was just chatting to me, and he said, like, "Are you married?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Oh, how do you do without sex in Sudan?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, thank you very much. I'm doing okay. I've got a few good books with me." And then he kind of started sliding his hand up my leg. I kind of moved his hand, and then he was really trying to grope me. And then I was like, okay, right. Then we were kind of slowing to a traffic light. So I was like, okay, I'm kind of bailing out now. But since we've had Grab and Uber, I haven't had that issue. So the journeys are less exciting, but more reliable.
No,
and the other thing there is
that I'm going to interrupt you just for a second, because before
please.
you move on, hold the thought. But this is a point where that typical British mindset of, oh no, it's not really a big deal. Do you understand how many people will hear you say what you just said about that cab in Burma? It's like, yeah, and then I just had to physically bail out of a driving taxi. It's like the Jason Bourne, James Bond level of that story is pretty high, right? You do realize that.
I guess a bit, but they weren't being violent to me. They weren't threatening anything, but it was clear, now if they were a bit drunk or whatever, I'm not sure. But I got to the point, and I was very clear we were not going in the right direction. There was no reason to be going. It was like 1 a.m. and they're not stopping when I asked them to. So even though, there was no gun being pointed at me or anything like that, but there was some adrenaline at that point, yes. And you're right, a lot of the stories, they sound fun, but, mostly at the time I was absolutely terrified. Indeed.
Yeah, that's the part in the movies that you don't see, is that it's only a cool story once it's over and you're sitting back home, talking about it to friends like half a year later and laughing about it over drinks. But at the moment itself,
exactly.
It's not the same. Yeah, go ahead.
And that linked to that taxi thing. How I knew was because I had a local SIM card for my mobile phone. And that nearly in every country now, you get a local SIM card for like $1. There is no excuse not to have one. And this thing, some people are like, oh, but I'm on holiday, I'm in this exotic place, I'll use the Wi-Fi at the hotel, I won't bother getting a local SIM. Like, no. You need it. You need to be able to call for trouble. If there's trouble, you need the internet for research on the fly when you get completely lost. You need Google Maps so you can check that taxi, if it's not an Uber or Grab, is going the right way. So I think that's a really important thing. And the other thing is, hopefully you have a phone with a camera. Nearly every phone has that on now. And that can be super useful. Photograph people, especially if you're going to have to trust someone to drive you or guide you somewhere. You've got a picture of them. Photograph license plates of vehicles, send them to someone. I'm in this vehicle for the next 8 hours, maybe think it's a bit dodgy, please, here's the license plate. If you agree on money for someone to do something, now there can often be misunderstandings because of language afterwards. So you say, I'm going to pay you $100. You're going to do, you're going to take me to this place, or you're going to organize this thing for me. It gets done, and then they come back. Oh no, we said 200. Right. No. So it's videoed now, so there can be no disagreement afterwards. And then the state of vehicles and rooms, because another kind of scam can be, oh, I lent you that car in perfect condition, or that motorbike, was brand new and now it's 20 years old. Clearly you've damaged it. Or that hotel room was a beautiful suite when you checked in. So that kind of thing, just so you've got, you can take kind of physical evidence of things, because again, in such places, you're not going to necessarily be able to rely on reliable police or courts or justice system or that kind of thing. So you need to think about covering yourself that way instead.
And how do people react when you start? You're like, okay, we're going to make an agreement about money. Like you said, okay, I give you $100 for you to take me there. And you whip out your phone and you start recording that. How do they react? Is there like indignation? You don't trust me, blah, blah, blah? Or is it like, oh, okay, this guy knows what he's doing?
I think you can kind of dictate that with your attitude. I always do it in a very friendly way, and I make it's in the same way when I refuse food that I know is going to make me really sick because of, it's like, this is a local delicacy. It's goat's milk that we put in the sun for 6 weeks and then add some sugar to. And you think, like, no. Instead of saying, that is a health risk, I can't possibly eat that, and that's disgusting, and what's wrong with your country, saying I have a very delicate stomach, I have a weak foreigner stomach, I have a bit of issue, whatever. So the same thing with this, I want to be sure I do what I say. I have such a bad memory, that's why I'm videoing this.
Yeah.
I want you to know that I'm reliable so that we can trust each other, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So try and do it in a friendly, kind of smiley way. And if someone really resists it, that probably means that's because they want to rip you off. So go and find someone else. I mean, that's a great test.
Yeah.
If they have a problem with that, maybe they're going to be the problem.
I think you make a good point here, and again, it boils down to understanding that things are very different from Western countries, because mostly in Asia you have dignity cultures, in the sense that they need to save face. Saving face is very important. Dignity is not the right word, but face-saving culture would be better.
Yeah.
And in that, the way that you approach a conflict is very different from with us. It's like if you're used to calling some sort of help desk over here and getting angry because your computer's not working, or you go complain in the store and get angry at the store manager because the delivery isn't there on time, that's not the right approach when you're in Asia, I think.
Exactly. No, and that will cause more problems, than you had in the first place. And often you won't even realize, because people will respond to anger with kind of laughter, because they don't want to lose face, but you're actually really pissing them off, and something they then may be done against you behind the scenes, or something will happen and you will kind of have no idea. So I mean, it's really a last ditch thing to shout out or to get angry. And normally I restrict it to a few seconds. If someone's trying to drag me off, or I've had someone at one point trying to drag a bag off my partner that I was traveling with, and at that point it's a sharp shout. Or when I had a home invasion before in Africa, then it's screaming top of the voice, like, what the hell are you doing? But that's very targeted and specific, to use anger in that way. Generally, no. It's gonna cause more issues for you. Okay,
great. Any other tips that you want to mention?
I just two more. I think one will be accommodation. You have to stay somewhere when you're traveling. So I mean, don't stay on the ground floor. It's too easy to get in. Put something behind the door, even if it doesn't secure it. You and I were discussing this the other day. It makes a noise. It gives you time. I mean, I've been woken up at 4 a.m. by someone breaking into my house. It's a very powerless feeling. And I was, I don't know if this is TMI, but I happened to be sleeping naked at the time. And, you feel very vulnerable, So like, right, dash out of bed, first thing, get some clothes on, and then I take some action and see what's happening. So it just gives you that extra bit of time. So I mean, if you're in a house, you're living somewhere instead of just staying there for the night, then actually securing your bedroom door as well as the main door of your residence. There are little door lock gadgets you can get, which even if someone's got a key from the outside, it will jam the lock. I have one of them. I can just put on. I mean, slightly more extreme things. Again, if I'm living somewhere, because of what's happened to me in the past. I mean, I have batons, I have pepper spray, etc. To use, because also it's not that you're calling 911 and the cops are there in 2 minutes. The cops may not come. They may not pick up. You have no ideas. So, I mean, you were talking on your podcast a while back about when you're in California and some beautiful out-of-the-way farms and houses, and how self-reliant people would need to be, because if they have an emergency, it's going to take so much time for someone to get in there. Having said all that, I mean, there are times like a month ago, I was up at a nomad camp near the India-Bhutan border. I was staying in a tent, and I woke up in the middle of the night and there was this really heavy breathing right by my head. And I absolutely, panicked, like, oh my God, what's going on? Realized it was most probably a yak, and hopefully not a Himalayan bear, outside the tent licking the fly sheet. And then was just laying there saying, what should I do? And what would Demeere do in such a situation? I thought, well, maybe I should shout and scare it. But then I thought, if I do that, it may just trample me to death over the tent, kind of thing. But is it just going to gradually eat through the tent and then start eating my face in the night? So I mean, there was a couple of sleepless hours there until it eventually moved away. So I mean, there are sometimes limits to how much you can secure your sleeping space. Yeah. And the final thing was about martial arts practice, which I thought I should mention, because I mean, I've been training with you for years, and I try and train every day. I try and keep it up when I'm traveling, that the schedule is a bit less. Obviously, there's a solo training focus. I try not to do it in public. It can arouse unwanted attention, especially if you're training something, kicking, punching, whatever, that's obviously kind of martial. So hotel rooftops are often my place of choice. And our system that we training involves some weapons. These days, I try and just grab an umbrella or a stick if I want to practice my weapons work. I do have a travel sword and a travel saber, and this is not a exotic country story, but I was traveling back from London back to Brussels, and I'd been with our teacher Dan Doherty in London doing some training, and then the police detained me getting the Eurostar, the train that goes on the English Channel from the UK to mainland Europe. Said, "Sir, what is this in your luggage?" And I said, "Oh, these are my travel swords, obviously." And they were like, "Right, please come with us." And then luckily I had a book with them from our style saying, no, this is a thing. And then they made me kind of do a few moves, kind of step back a little bit. And I said, "No, genuinely, I do practice this stuff." They were like, "Okay, we believe you, but we're destroying them, and you can't take them on the train." So yeah, that kind of that kind of learned me my lesson, really.
I'm pretty sure that you're the cause
just
of
some
Brexit,
common sense
Andy.
with practicing. Yeah, it's because of that.
Yeah, that's what got everything started. Yeah.
Yes.
No, that's really good, and that's a truckload of very practical information that I hope the listeners can kind of take in and obviously re-listen to the podcast if you are preparing for traveling in one of those countries, because there's a lot of like you said, first-hand experience of doing it the right way, but also when something goes wrong, learning from mistakes, learning from things that didn't go exactly as planned, and just acquiring not only the practical knowledge, but also the skill of just managing everything, which is something that, I mean, for you, obviously, like you said, like with the wallet example, okay, yeah, normally I would always do this, but then this time a little bit in a hurry, and then the rain, blah, blah, blah. And it's exactly that. It's that normally, well, for you normally, because you've been doing this for decades now. For most people, it's the first time, so they don't have automatic reactions drilled into them, or they don't have the let's say the experience to judge certain situations correctly, and then could end up into trouble. Which I think brings us to another interesting question. So what when you do meet some bad guys? What then?
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's true, right? I mean, I suppose it's like, as you always say when you talk about self-defense, the most important thing is avoiding the situation in the first place. But there comes a time when something happens. First thing is probably knowing you don't. I mean, if they come and they're like, they have a knife or a gun and they're like, "Give me your wallet," they're probably not very nice people. These are not the good guys. These are definitely the bad guys. Okay. But before that, sometimes, you don't know whether to trust someone or not. And saying earlier, one example, if you're videoing and making the agreement with this new driver or fixer and they're not liking that, that could be a good sign. Better if you have a previous recommendation about anyone that you're going to use for something a little bit vital in your trip. The other thing is to give people opportunities to lie to you or scam you and see if they take them. For example, "Oh, I'll pay you today's fee already. It's $100, right?" And then just give them a wad of dollars and actually give them 150 and see if they come back and say anything. So little tests you can do like that in order to, find out whether you're going to trust someone or not. And I think you develop some intuition. And a good friend of mine says, like, if you approach someone for help and they seem helpful, probably it's okay. If someone approaches you offering a service or with a weird request, then straight away I would be, just a little bit suspicious. Now, it might be innocent. A lot of these places not many foreigners go to. You're an object of interest. But there's a couple, for example, in Brazil and in India, they have a shoe cleaning scam where someone will kind of throw something on your shoe when you're kind of not looking, and then someone else will come up and say, oh, you've got something on your shoe, like, let me clean it. And you think, oh, what a nice chap, coming and cleaning my shoe, but there's someone else kind of coming up behind to rob you. So generally, although, that is going to mean that sometimes someone is coming up and being nice, and you're just like, no, I don't want to come into your house for tea, or I don't want your assistance with this or that, I don't need it. It does guard against these scams. And there's even, a lot of people won't give money to beggars. They say, well, you don't know where it goes. A lot of beggars are in organized groups in some places. And, there's a kind of pimp-like figure who's actually taking the money. But there's one scam in India where a little girl will come up to you in Bombay and say, like, oh, I need some milk powder for my sister. But mister, no money, I won't take any money. You come to the shop and you buy it for me. And you think, wow, that's definitely, how can that be a scam? And you go and you buy the milk powder and you give it to the shopkeeper and you see the milk powder physically handed over. But the whole thing is, they're all in cahoots, and this is kind of all a scam. So that's one step back still from actually coming up and trying to rob you, right? That's someone who's coming up under the guise of an innocent request or doing you a favor or offering you a service. And you're like, this is a bit off. I'd be polite because being rude, is an excuse for them to get indignant and make a problem, blah, blah, blah. Be firm. I make an excuse. Oh, yeah. Oh, my shoe's dirty. So sorry. I've got to be somewhere else. I'm meeting a friend now. I have to go. And then you're kind of out of there. If you're getting robbed, if it's that simple, give the money up. Don't have too much on you. I have still, I've resisted certain things, which when I was ambushed once and robbed, I gave up the money straight away, and then the guys wanted to search me, and I didn't want that. I knew from our training that we do in Tai Chi Chuan and pushing hands and stuff, I didn't want the guy that close with, kind of hands on me and whatever. So I was like, no, you've got the money, there's some negotiation involved here. That's all you're getting, you're not searching me and you're not searching, the person I'm with and stuff. Then if you're instead, what's more frequent is that you're arrested or you're getting in some trouble by the authorities or police or military or an armed group with or without good reason. There, be very polite, be apologetic, but a little bit firm and try and establish a rapport. Also, I would say imply, they say good writing is kind of show, don't tell. Yeah. And there's a similar thing there. Imply that you're maybe a bit important, that people know where you are. I was stopped crossing from India into Nepal. I was on my own on a motorcycle a couple of months ago, and the guy pulled me over the border. I think it was a customs guy, and he was clearly looking for some money or something. Oh, what are you doing? Switch off the engine. Where exactly are you going? And I used to live in the Nepalese capital, Kathmandu. So I said, I'm going to see some friends in Kathmandu. Oh, you have friends there? And then I started embellishing a bit and say, oh yeah, I used to work with the government. I have a lot of great connections there. And, he kind of got the message, and he made the connection and did the kind of reasoning and let me go. A far more crude example that somehow I got away with about 10 years ago in Sierra Leone in West Africa, where there's just it used to be a terrible airport with no aircon, full of mosquitoes, and everyone trying to get money off you as you check in, even like the baggage handler, they're weighing your luggage and then saying that'll be $10, sir. And I was going through customs. I was very tired, and then the guy was angling the customs guy for a bribe or money or to detain me, and I just looked him in the eye and said, "Do you know who I am?" And kind of gave my best steely expression. Amazingly, he was like, "Oh, sorry, boss," and let me through. So I kind of just got to the plane as soon as possible before he could realize that, I was kind of, I was absolutely nobody. So that kind of works. If you are taken away, that has happened to me, try and establish where you're being taken. Again, if this is someone this is army or police or whatever, try and establish where you're being taken, try and get a message out to someone and say, look, I'm being arrested. I'm being taken here. If possible, try and say, no, take me to the main police station, or, don't get dragged off, obviously, if possible, down an alley. But I've never hit someone in any of these situations, even when I've been ambushed. I've defended from strikes and people lashing out at me, but it's always been, no, we're going to try and, I'm going to try and talk my way out of this. And that's definitely the biggest thing. And don't forget, you always talk about the legal implications of getting into a fight on the street. This is a whole different level.
Yeah.
I mean, even if you know the local law and the guy's harassing you, you're a foreigner, maybe you don't have connections, you could end up banged up for a long time, you know, if you are, you know, you've hit someone, you've beaten them up on the street. So yeah, you know, that's like super, super extreme.
Yeah.
And as I say, I've never been there, even when, I mean, I've had guys hitting me, kicking me, hitting me with a baton. I've just been kind of defending, pushing them back, and then look, we're going back to talking. And that's how we're gonna solve the problem. Yeah.
And here's the thing, that's something that I try to explain that very often on my blog, podcasts, and on my social media. And every now and then people get so angry about it and or triggered, but especially when it involves law enforcement. And then in most Western countries, overall, the standard of law enforcement is pretty damn high. Yes, there are assholes, yes, there are bad cops and so on, but overall, it's pretty good. And if you get arrested and taken away there, overall, in general, it's reasonably, you know, civil, and you won't get tortured and so on. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. Obviously, everybody can find exceptions and find bad cops, but overall, it's pretty good.
Yeah.
But the places you're talking about, that is totally different. These are in many cases, failed states, where there is basically no real justice system, no real police force, and no real authority sometimes, where it's a bunch of groups just fighting over authority and so on. And the locals live in those kind of societies, and they adapt. And if there's no real justice anywhere, well, then often violence is one of the things that is always on the table. And it's like you said, they know you're a foreigner, and there may be a lot of latent racism, which is something that, again, in Western countries, they look at you like, what? What do you mean those kind of people that live in those exotic countries can be racist towards white people? Yes, that's how things are. And this is not controversial. If you visit those countries, you can experience that. Obviously, the other side of that coin is that those are some of the most inviting and hospitable people that you can encounter. You can have an amazing time, but you're not in a Western country. You're not gonna. I mean, I know of a guy who was in Hong Kong, and he was getting scanned by a taxi driver years ago, and he managed to get into a fight with the guy. The Hong Kong police came over, and the guy was black, and the police came over. They arrested him, and they roughed him up, and he was in jail for a while there. And eventually they kicked him out. But they're like, "Who the hell do you think you are?" It's like, "Oh, you're a black guy. All right, we'll see what we think about you guys." And it's, I mean, the world is a lot more complicated than a lot of people think, and you've got a lot of issues that people think only exist here in Western countries. They exist all over the world. Anyway, that was my little rant.
Yeah.
Because you mentioned the.
No, I mean, I agree, and I think.
Go ahead.
But there's a really good point there about, there is amazing, and that wouldn't have made a good podcast for your show. But I mean, I could tell many more stories about all the amazing people and all the times I've been helped and all that stuff didn't happen. The flip side is, you're going to stand out, right, in these places. Now, it's one thing, like if you're in Rome or New York, people say, oh, don't walk around as a tourist looking at your map or with your flashy camera or whatever. Fine. In these places, it's not, it's not the color of your skin, it's not your ethnicity. You're going to look different. People look at you and they know. So whatever you do, you're not fitting in. And yes, you're an economic opportunity. You're also someone who maybe doesn't know the local rules, can be taken advantage of. So I mean, you're a bit of a beacon for sure, unfortunately. So you need to be aware of that. And I mean, when I was talking, I think also when I have. Give them the money generally. I mean, I have been in situations. I was in Mozambique once. I was stopped by like 4 soldiers. They're like, oh, show us your passport. My passport's back at a hotel. Oh, you have to have it on you. Hotel is like, I can see it. It's 200 meters away. What's that in your pocket? It's my wallet. Looks like it's a very big wallet. Yeah, okay. And I could see them thinking, and we're gonna ramp up now. But in that case, I said, look, the hotel's right there. I'm going to go and get my passport and come and show it to you. And then I turned around and I started walking. And I mean, that would have been obviously very stupid to then be shot, because I didn't want to give them the money in my wallet. But I mean, I waited, and if I'd heard the sound of the cocking gun or if they shouted, then I would have definitely turned around and, done the necessary, but they didn't. And at that point, and my hotel was so close, and I knew just getting to the next block, there'd be people around, and the soldiers wouldn't pull it there because I was just around this little corner where there was nobody. So yeah, sometimes, I mean, you don't just kind of lay down and roll over, right? And so I would normally, if it's a straight street robbery, fine, take the money. But if this is, these guys are ostensibly members of the armed forces and really shouldn't be doing this, then I'll maybe try and resist it a little bit, but only up to the point where I see there's a serious, threat. And if the gun's being leveled at me, sure, take the bullet. And,
I think this is also one of those situations in which, because you're so experienced in that, is that you can make a judgment call better than people who are in that country, in that situation for the very first time. And also what you said is that, I mean, you draw attention to yourself just by being the white guy in Africa. I mentioned this before. This was actually on my Facebook group. That is the public Facebook group on my Facebook page that anybody can join. But Eric Parsons, he has a Karate for Life Foundation. He worked in Uganda with the Peace Corps, and I asked him a while ago. I said, okay, so how, what was it like? What did you learn when it comes to self-defense and safety and so on? And he said, this is the thing. I mean, you stand out. You're in Uganda, you're a white guy, everybody notices you. There's no way to blend in. It doesn't work.
You can't be the gray man, can you? No, as you always say, right? Yeah, that's not possible there. Yeah.
I was in China in '93 doing a tour there, and I was in places where they would just walk up to me and smell me, because I was the first white guy they saw.
I did that the first time we met, though, Wim, to be fair. So
that is true. That is true. It's
something about you.
It's my deodorant. It's really good. Yeah, and same thing. I mean, so several years ago, you invited me and my girlfriend to Bali, and while we were there, we were visiting this touristic place. She's a redhead. She's got beautiful long red hair, and there were Japanese tourists asking to be on a picture with her because that's the thing over there. And she lived in Japan, so she's used to it. And I was like, what the hell is going on here? Random Japanese tourists want to be on a picture with you. What's going on? She says, no, it's just my hair. I'm like, okay. Well, this could be something totally innocent, as is the case here, or it could be something really dangerous. But you need to know, you need to have the experience of living in those countries and know, like, okay, this is fine, or like, okay, I need to get the hell out of here right now. So yeah. Anyway, I digressed a little bit. Yeah. I think we covered that quite well. What to do when you meet the bad guys. So you mentioned this several times here with many of the stories that you encountered. This seems to be like a staple for many Asian and African countries. So what do you do if you get asked for a bribe? Let's go a little bit deeper into that.
Yeah, and I mean, this often happens, and you've got to understand the rationale for it as well. I mean, people are often not paid their salaries, right? So that police officer, why does the British police officer not normally ask for a bribe? And maybe, I don't want to single out a particular country, but in a developing country, they are asking for a bribe. One is necessity. The guy in the developing country is not being paid his monthly salary, or if he is, it's very low. And the other is ability, that the guy in the UK kind of knows there's a reporting process, and he will probably get caught, whereas in the developing country there is not necessarily. So they're looking for the guys who will, and as a foreigner, who they think are would be good for a bribe. Normally it won't be like you have to pay a bribe. It will be there is a special fee for this, or there is a fine for this. Now, sometimes you might want to pay it. I mean, if you have been doing something naughty, then, or, they kind of have a point, then that might be the easiest way out of the situation, just kind of pay up. But otherwise, my first thing is play dumb. And I would be like, oh, and then you certainly don't get angry. Certainly just, oh my God, you're asking me for a bribe. I would say, official payment. I see. Yes, absolutely. Happy to pay that. Of course, I would need a receipt. As you know, it's very important to ensure the fight against corruption that your government is so committed to. And in basically any developing countries, there is an official fight against corruption, because this is a key issue that holds back development. So that's normally a good one, insisting on the receipt. Or, the cash is back at my hotel, let's go back there. And they often then will give up and won't want to come back. But, again, try that, but don't get shot for $5. The other thing is, I'd often say, really important, learn just a few words of the local language. You don't have to become fluent in Kiswahili or Hindi or whatever, but you can do it. You can learn 10 words, and that can get through lots of situations. But when you're being asked for a bribe, and I used to live in Kathmandu in Nepal, and there was a bridge I used to have to drive over to get home, and they would often have a police checkpoint there, but they didn't have quite enough English to properly ask for the bribe. So I would just act very dumb and keep smiling and say, oh, beautiful country, I love Nepal. And they would always kind of give up after a few minutes. And I did the same thing recently. I was stopped at nighttime at a military checkpoint in South Asia a couple of weeks ago. And the guys, when they checked the papers, they're a bit surprised, foreigners, whatever. Okay. It was night, and I'm just getting back in the vehicle, and then a couple of other guys in uniforms came up near the side of the vehicle, tapped on the window and was saying something. We didn't quite have the English to ask, and I knew it was clear that they were making signs for money, but I just gave them a very polite, kind of the namaste hand gesture, respectfully smiled, thanked them, and said to my buddy, start the engine and let's move. And they didn't push it further, and it was fine. So I think that'd be my basic guidelines for when you get asked for a facilitation fee.
Yeah, for me it's also again I've talked to a bunch of people, and people often ask me questions about safety and security and so on. And I've mentioned this earlier in the episode here, but I mean, just the sheer fact that bribes are just an integral part of how a society works is something that you need to wrap your head around. You need to accept, this is how things go over here. And like you said, it's not everywhere. It's not as bad as in every single place where you can go to. But you need to understand that, like you said, don't get angry. Don't accuse them of stuff. Again, because we live you're in cultures where saving face is very important. So if you accuse them of being a thief, or if you get upset and angry, they cannot save face, which means they cannot let you save face either, which means that it can escalate into something you really don't want to. It's like you said, for $5, you don't want to go there. And if you are not, how should I put it? If you have anger management issues, you can end up in really, really a lot of trouble just by not managing this kind of exchange correctly. And like you said, there's ways sometimes you pretend you don't speak English, or that they don't speak enough English for you to get what they mean, and you smile, and then you're polite, and you give the salutation, and then then you drive on, and that can work as well. But it's the mindset from the get-go is different, as opposed to, well, nobody's going to take advantage of me because I'm so awesome, because I'm this and that. No, you're not. You're halfway across the world from where you live. You're nothing here. They don't care. If you die, they don't care. Nobody knows you. You're just another white guy, another tourist, or another government official, or another guy from a country that locals might hate because they were invaded by them or whatever. Could be a gazillion things. But I mean, like they say in the movie, you're not in Kansas anymore. It's just you just live.
You're not in Kansas anymore, but it can end in some very funny situation. A buddy of mine was pulled over for speeding. I think it may have been in Indonesia, I'm not sure. And they said you were speeding, and he was like, "Oh, well, prove it to me." And he'd lived in the country for a while. He knew the drill. And then they said, "Oh, we took a photo of it." They came with a photo. And he said, "This photo is of a red car." They said, "Yes, it's you." "My car is white." And he kind of got out and pointed at it. "Well, no, but you were speeding anyway." And it went, I think they were demanding $50, and he got it down to he would buy them both a Coke. And that's what he ended up doing. So they saved a bit of face, and excellent negotiation skills. I mean, he's Dutch though, so it's kind of in his blood.
Yeah. Well, that's a good example of. It's like you said, he lived in that country for a while. The main thing I want to point out to the listeners is that's key. Is that you've lived there for a while, you speak some of the language, you've been through this kind of drill a number of times before, And you kind of, like you said it earlier, you develop this instinct of who can you trust, who can't you trust, and what kind of situation warrants a lot more caution than others, and that you develop this feel for it that you, okay, I can get this down to like 2 bottles of Coke as opposed to $50. So
yes, exactly. Yeah.
What I really would want to avoid is that the listener thinks like oh no, listen to all these cool stories about how Andy and his friends manage that, instead of understanding that, well, actually the story is one thing, but how you get to the point where you can navigate things so that you end up with that story, that's quite something else. Takes a bit of time, practice, and some forethought.
And I have given away my wallet, and I have paid bribes, and I have done what's necessary at many other points, and been that guy and been quite scared, but thankfully, still here to tell the tale. So yeah.
So let's move on to, and again, I'm going to point this out to the listener. The reason for the podcast is because I've been on your case for a long time to write a book about your experiences, and kind of like a travel guide for help people save. If I would have had your experience, I would do it myself, but I don't. So I'm not the right guy to write that. We're focusing on a lot of the negativity, but this is not really the episode where we can go into all the positive stuff. But there is tons and tons of awesome experiences that you've talked to me about as well, and how beautiful the countries are, how friendly the people can be, nature, wildlife. I mean, we're focusing on the negative, so I just want to point that out to be sure that everybody is like, oh no, never go there. Well, hold on, it's not that cut and dry. That said, what have been your scariest experiences? How's that for a setup?
What's the most beautiful sunset you've ever experienced? That said, what have been my scariest experiences? I mean, there was one quite a few years back in Darfur, which is an area of Western Sudan, which subsequently became quite famous or infamous for some very nasty stuff that was going on there, and kind of ethnic cleansing. But I was there at one of these random things. I'd been given a contact of a guy to meet who was a friend of a friend of a friend. He turned out to actually be the colonel in charge of anti-bandit operations in the region. So I stopped in for tea, and then he said, where are you going? And I said, we're going up to this place called Jebel Mara, this beautiful mountain in the west of Sudan. He said, you can't possibly go there without a military escort. I said, okay. So I ended up then in the back of basically what they use there is the old Toyota Land Cruisers, like really old ones that have like the flat bed in the back. So it's basically a pickup truck. And then you mount a machine gun in the back, and you have a few soldiers in the back there also with semi-automatic weapons. So they were actually on bandit patrol on the Sudanese-Chadian border, and then I ended up kind of in the back with them. And of course you think that's great, and you think I'm super secure, until the point where something happens. And we were driving through the bush, it was dark, and I was kind of standing up in the back of the truck with my hands on top of the cab looking out. And I'll never forget it. It seared into my memory. A guy just ran in front of us in the bush in military fatigues, but also like one of those World War I leather flying helmets and goggles with an AK-47, and started screaming. And I jumped back down in the cab and thought, like, what the hell am I doing here? Like, at least if I was on my own, I could give him my money, my clothes, my soul, whatever, and get out of this. But this is going to be a firefight now. And I mean, that's the thing, like the story in Kashmir, I don't want to be sometimes near the guy with a gun because I might be less protected. There's a lot of shouting. It turned out he was some undercover guy with another unit, but we were all actually on the same side, and people have not been made aware that a patrol was coming through. So in like 30 minutes, I was sitting out in the bush. We were all having a drink together, and we didn't have a common language, but I just kind of put my arm around him, and with a smile, like called him a few names and told him he'd taken 10 years off my life. I think he just thought I was kind of toasting his health. So yeah, that was pretty scary. I had the home invasion in Ethiopia. So I remember I guess that can obviously happen anywhere, but it was an interesting example. It was the first ever recorded home invasion in Addis Ababa, the Ethiopian capital. So everyone thinks out of the African capitals this is pretty safe, but it can happen sometimes. I've been shot at while out running in Israel. I used to live near to the West Bank, and some guys kind of taking pot shots. Thankfully missed. A nice one in Indonesia, stupidly. I mean, this is one of those things like that I learned from, because the lesson is really branded into my memory now. So if you're living in a developing country, often your rent needs to be paid in cash, and often needs to be paid a year in advance.
Yeah.
Because, again, this is because contracts are not readily enforceable. So the landlord is like, no, you're going to pay me, $10,000, and you pay it in one go. It has to be in $100 bills. So I'd gone down to Singapore and I picked up my rent money for when I was living in Burma. And then I went down to Bali, where, as you say, I used to have a house down there. And so I'm going through Indonesian customs, completely forgetting that I've got all this cash in. And I've also completely forgotten that I'd been getting a new visa in Singapore, and I legally own 2 passports, because I travel a lot, and that's something that the British government kind of allows you to have. Then I'm pulled over by Indonesian customs, and they say, how much money have you got on you? And I'm like, I don't know, $100. They go through my bag. So there's $10,000 here in crisp $100 bills, which means you're automatically on suspicion of drug dealing, because there's a lot of people smuggling drugs into Bali. And then I suddenly remember I've also got a second passport, stuffed in the back of my bag. So I was thinking, I mean, this is really bad, because that's a country where they don't mind kind of locking up foreigners, and some other places they might be a bit more reticent or whatever. But there's a lot of foreigners locked up for drug smuggling in Bali. So yeah, that one. Luckily, I had a letter with me that said that I was working with an embassy in Burma, and that kind of helped them to believe that I was genuine and I could talk my way out of it. But it could have gone. I think it could have gone much. It could have gone much worse, that one. And then, the story we alluded to a bit earlier, and I'd called you right after that happened, having a nice afternoon motorcycle ride in eastern Nepal with my girlfriend on the back through a national park. 4 guys jump out with scarves around their head, weapons. I try and swing the bike round, crash it. Before you know it, they're kind of on top of you, and gave them the money, kept them, at bay, let's say, kept them at a distance. Trying to talk your way out of it, but that's a key thing to remember as well. They didn't speak a lot of English, so that was, if they had, I think my negotiation would have been much better. But yeah, in that case, eventually they kind of, they gave up, and it was like, no, you're not searching us. Take the money. You've got $150. That can kind of be enough. But there's just two others I mentioned, which are kind of different and kind of, I think, funnier, which they weren't direct physical threats, but they were to do with religion. And I'm sure your listeners have heard of voodoo, and a lot of people think voodoo is just something from movies, but it is actually a religion that involves some black magic. It comes from Benin in West Africa, and it was exported along with the slave trade to Haiti in the Caribbean. There was a James Bond film in Haiti which featured it, and I think then it got kind of known in the West. But I was in the town of Ouida in Benin, which is where voodoo comes from, and where the word for Ouija board that people use in these kind of black magic ceremonies to contact the dead comes from. And we basically went to a ceremony, and then a guy got possessed by the spirits, and he had this stick, and then he was like wild-eyed crazy and running at the crowd. And I was told by everyone around me, like, run like hell. If he touches you with that stick, you will be possessed, by the evil spirit. And it sounds stupid saying it now, but at the time, when you're surrounded by 200 people who have the fear of God or the devil in them and are running, and of course the guy ran straight at me because I was white. So I think I kind of ran, faster than I ever had before. And the other was just a few weeks ago. We met the Dalai Lama. Amazingly, has an oracle, a kind of in Tibetan Buddhism, which is the Dalai Lama's lineage. There is also a lot of kind of magic and mysticism in there too. So this guy who we met in his house gets rid of the evil spirits and this kind of thing, goes into a trance. He gets choked out basically with a silk scarf, becomes possessed by a mountain spirit. And then, so we'd heard, stabs people and pulls out evil spirits on them. So we thought it'd be interesting to meet him, and we were there, and then it just got quite weird at one point. Like someone was being treated in an anteroom, and a guy walked past with a red hot poker, to go and do something. And then we're just sitting there, and he's telling us about, if he sees someone he knows if they have an evil spirit, and there's his big knife on the wall. and you're thinking, I just try and look normal now and like you're not possessed, because I'm just waiting for him to look at me and kind of say, no, I think you need some work done, mate. But thankfully that kind of came off okay. Yeah. So I hope that was a little bit of variety. That's a couple of the ones that just sprung to mind. Yeah, there's a few others, but they're there for the book.
So how do you deal with fear then? I mean, you get scared or not, or how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think there's I remember you had a guy on recently who was doing MMA and then was doing Tai Chi and stuff, and he was talking about that adaptation. You didn't call it adaptation, right? But you kind of normalization of things. So which can be good, that you get more used to things, right? So like crazy driving or sleeping on the floor of a hut, or having a terrible toilet, or being asked for a bribe, or, okay, a gun's being pointed at me, but it doesn't look too serious. So a lot of things become a bit more normal, which is good, but can be bad at the same time, because you shouldn't obviously let your limits go up too much and then not realize when there's still a danger. In a new country, it's step by step. What's allowable? What can I, what's okay? What's dangerous? Speak to locals. So if it's a new place I don't know, step by step, and ask local people. Knowing when it's, and that's a bit intuition or experience or having a friend. Okay, people say this thing or this road or this trip is dangerous, but do we give it a go? Okay, but at what point do we turn back? So where is the level where, let's say it gets to this time, or this happens, or we get held up, that we call this off, and it gets too difficult. And then it becomes kind of bizarre, and that shows you how it is all kind of learnt, and how you build this up. That I'm fine driving a Land Rover across the Himalayas, but like driving in Brussels is something that still really scares me. And I always say to someone when I come back to train with you, like, I should hire a car. And I always just like take an Uber, because I'm like, no, these Belgians. I mean, this is still very scary. And I mean, the other thing is, plenty of scary things happen in the West. You have knife crime in London. You don't have anything like that in Bangkok or Khartoum. And I've had my Christmas presents stolen by baggage handlers from my suitcase in a European airport, which was your very own European airport in Belgium. Yeah. That's the kind of thing people imagine only happens in some developing country. That was Brussels at Christmas. Yeah. So
awesome. Yeah. Well, and that's saying quite a lot about Belgian traffic, because I was with you in the Jeep in Bali driving through that crazy traffic, and I was like, I'm never driving a car here. Never, ever,
right.
ever. Because it's, Asian traffic is unlike anything in the world, in my opinion. So nope, not doing that. All right. So anything else you want to say in conclusion? I think we just hit the 1 hour mark here.
I think, I'm not at all special. I'm not at all extra brave. I wasn't born to do this. I did it step by step. One of my first trips going to Sudan to teach English when I was like 19, 20, I was terrified to go out of the airport. I was terrified to go on the bus. So this is very much learned and acquired. Nothing's 100% secure, unless you stay at home and kind of Netflix and chill. There's going to be a risk. And basically, overwhelmingly, my experience has been lovely people, lovely countries, people saving me from, myself or stupid decisions, or being stuck with nowhere to stay or whatever, or being broken down. It's happened so many times that I've kind of been saved by local people. But you do have to accept and get used to the fact that some safety and security things, they aren't going to be as good as they are back home. So, go and have a try and see if after a bit you adjust to that and that's okay. And it might be that it's not. And you just say, that's not for me, and then that's from, say, the state of the road, the driving, to have to rely not on rules and signs, but just, instinct and whose biggest wins, to things like reliability of the police, to the electricity supply, to even things like airport security. And I'll never forget being in Papua New Guinea in the Pacific, and a guy in front of me taking off his AK-47 and putting it through the X-ray machine, and me thinking, what are they checking in the X-ray? It's very obviously a semi-automatic automatic weapon before it goes through the machine. So, there's some stuff you have to get used to. But I think for most people, it's overwhelmingly, a positive experience. And with a few precautions, a bit of common sense, there's just an amazing world out there, and this is for me one of the most satisfying things you can do with your life, to go to these fairly unexplored places and cultures and meet the people there. So I would highly recommend it.
All right. And I just want to also point out that, we're talking your experience, either, going off on some sort of official mission for government agencies and so on, doing aid work in third world countries and so on, or doing that as a tourist, which is very, very different from what people often think about these kind of countries. It's like you're not going in as some sort of military contractor where you're armed to the teeth. You've got a team with you. You've got a military base that you can fall back to. There's the cavalry that's going to come swooping in and save you. That is not what you did, and that is not your life. So those are very different circumstances with dangers to them as well, and obviously with advantages to them as well. We're talking about how you as a civilian, and I'm talking to the listener now, how you as a civilian can get these kind of things going. It's like you said, if you mentioned the story of having a letter from the embassy that you can show the guy at customs, like, hey, I'm here on official business. Well, that's very different than if you were the guy with the AK-47 trying to get into security. That's a totally different ball game. So people sometimes tend to mix those two kind of areas up, mix them together and conflate them. And I don't think that's the right way to approach it. Unless you join the military, unless you join some sort of contracting outfit, then life will be very different for you if you do those kind of travels. But overall, I want to end up on a positive note. Like you said, it's lovely people, gorgeous countryside, nature and so on, and have generally amazingly positive experiences. Probably in large part because you do all the preparation, get the knowledge, source locals for information, get help from them, and figure out how to navigate the dangers that do exist, as they are so very different from the UK or Belgium or what have you. I think that's a good note to end things on. Just before we end up, so I'm going to quickly say that Andy and I will keep continuing recording afterwards on the bonus episode on Patreon. So that's patreon.com/Wim Demeere, my name. Again, the link will be in the show notes. And we are going to take a few questions from my patrons. And also, Andy's going to give a bunch of tips on how to deal with people when you're traveling and to avoid trouble. Even more tips than he already gave. So it's going to be awesome. Check that out. But before we do that, what's next for you? What are you working on? What's going on for the near future?
So I have just brought out my first book, which is on Amazon at a very nice reduced price right now. It's called The Wrong Way Round: How Not to Travel to Burma by Motorcycle. And it's the story of my ill-fated 2-month drive on my own with my ex-partner on the back, who was or is a European aristocrat, which made for, interesting dynamics, and trying to be the first people to drive by bike from India to Burma. So apart from that, I've very recently been traveling with the Last Overland guys I mentioned earlier, who have now, they got to London a few weeks back from Singapore in a 1956 Land Rover. So I will probably be writing something about that. I did a 10-day silent meditation retreat in Japan, which was quite interesting from a number of points of view in terms of psychology and experience, and so there'll be something coming out on that one. But the main thing is, and it's always difficult to tell people with a strange face, but I am looking for the Yeti, which, as your listeners probably know, will probably think, well, this is this mythical creature. What is he talking about? This is a fairy story that lives up in the Himalayas. But having spent a lot of time up in the mountains there, I just again and again heard these stories from people in different countries, be it Bhutan or Tibet or Nepal or Burma, about, and they had different words for it in each place, but yes, that their forefathers told them about of a bipedal kind of ape-like creature with a kind of humanish face. And the more I looked into it, the more there was a fascinating story there. So we've been on a couple of trips with a friend, collecting interesting stories from nomads and others, and we're in talks now with a TV network to make a little documentary on that, which would be fantastic. And then there's this guy called Demeere keeps telling me I should write a book on travel security. So I guess I'll have to get on that as well.
Yeah. I'd really love for you to write that book, and obviously all the other stuff as well. I mean, The Last Overland, I think that's also going to be a BBC documentary, right?
I'm sure it's BBC, but it will be a TV documentary series coming out next year along with a book. And it's actually because there was a first Overland, which was 1956, the same car when it was in much better condition, driven in 1956 from London to Singapore, first ever guys to do that route. And then my friends took it back all these years later, along with the grandson of Tim Slessor, one of the original guys. So it's an amazing adventure and odyssey that they've done.
You tagged along with them for a bit, a part of the whole trip, I think, right?
Yeah, so it was I did like the Burma, India, and Nepal legs with them. Yeah, which was a lot of fun because I kind of knew those countries, so I could kind of help out a bit with with helping them get through. Yeah.
Okay, well, I think we covered a truckload of information, so I'm really glad we finally got to do this. Again, I'll put all the links in the show notes for the listeners to find. Before we continue talking on the bonus episode for Patreon, where can people reach you? What's the best way to follow you or social media, that kind of stuff? What's the best way?
Yeah, I think just right now is the Instagram, which is particular bear, as in particular and bear together, which there will also be a website coming up, some other things, but that's work in progress right now. So for a flavor of what I'm doing and where I'm traveling, then the particular bear Instagram account is the best way right now.
All right, awesome. Okay, Andy, I want to thank you very much for taking the time, and everybody get Andy's book. It's interesting. Again, link is in the show notes. It's a really interesting travelogue / personal story with you and your ex-girlfriend and so on, and just shows everybody how wild and strange the world can be, yet very interesting at the same time. Check out his Instagram as well. I know it's on there, a bunch of pictures that are really cool. If you think you know the world, you think you know Asia, you don't. Check out that. And we will keep on recording. So once again, Andy, thank you very much. And guys, I will talk to you all next time.
Thanks for listening to the Demeere podcast. For more information, go to www.wimsblog.com.